Hey, 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 welcome back. Today we're going to talk about economics and the nonsense they teach you in high school about environmental problems and pollution and absolutely wrong ways they come about solving those problems because they never solve them. But let's get into it. You might find it interesting. Thanks. Okay, welcome. We're talking about externalities and market failures, which are other terms that economists use to describe pollution. They always give things different names to make them sound better, whatever. We'll get into that. But this is about how an Econ 101 class manipulates teachers, fools students, and undermines efforts to regulate environmental pollution. That's exactly what this class promotes, but let's watch. And again, this is another reason we shouldn't teach Econ 101. So let's talk about social paradigm for Econ 101. And what I mean by social paradigm is that economists and people in an Econ 101 class always think of the world from one perspective. And that perspective is from a market. So they'll always view it in terms of a market, and they'll always think of, oh my God, where are these supply and demand curves, which are fake anyway, but you'll see that here in a second. And that using this consensus approach of always using a market to describe any situation provides a convenient break with reality. So what I mean by that is if I were looking out my window and I'm living on a river and the river's polluted, I'm not going to use a market to describe the pollution. I'm going to talk about the pollution, what it is, where it came from, the effects on the environment. But economists have this crazy dry view of markets and refuse to think of anything else. It's just an incomplete solution to the problem. And then what happens is teachers and students are then forced to accept this distorted, unrealistic view. They've got no choice. This prevents any constructive discussion about environment, impact, or pollution. It just chokes everything down and shuts down the discussion. So let's get into it. So the economists will tell you that, yeah, pollution exists, but there is a social optimum. And we're going to talk about the frame that they use, i.e. markets, that they use to deceive everybody. And that good old frame is supply and demand. So here's my supply of aluminum. Here's my demand for aluminum. Here's my equilibrium, which is nonsense. Here's my price, quantity, things of this sort. This is my frame. So starting from this goofball frame, they throw in, if we got pollution, there's this thing called the external costs, and they draw this little arrow like that. However, we have already distorted reality, okay? Accountants know that cost and price are not the same. Costs show up as an area, okay? And price is a cost per unit. And like they said, this is supposed to be price. So any measure in the vertical, like this arrow, is supposed to be a price or a cost per unit. So this is not the cost of pollution. This is the cost of pollution, and this would be the cost per unit. So they're really not using their model properly. So let's look at it in reality. In 2010, there was a mining disaster in Hungary. It polluted a 62-mile-long river, killing everything in the river. And the question is, what dollar value are you going to assume fills this little pink box, which is the cost for the pollution? And the answer is, it's not possible. Economists are always trying to value everything with respect to dollars. But if you talk to a real person and you go, beautiful sunset, right? Worth $1 million, right? You can't put a price tag on a beautiful view. You can't put a price tag on a clean river versus a dirty river. You know the difference, you don't like it, but you don't value it in dollars. It's something completely different. It's another dimension. So even if you could establish a cost, let's say it was $100 million to clean up this river, okay, that means this little box is worth $100 million, okay, then what is my value? What is my quantity that I use to determine price? Because cost divided by quantity gives me price. Do I use a quarterly volume of aluminum production? Do I use an annual quantity of aluminum production? Do I consider the entire globe's production values? Or do I just consider the production for this mine up here that had the disaster? Economists never talk about that. They never say how to actually apply their model in real life because you can't do it. You can't do it. What assumptions would you make about these things to come up with these values? It's not possible. So they draw this little curve in here and say that, well, here's your social cost, and that's your optimum, and that's where things should be. And that just doesn't make any sense. Economists are whitewashing the effects of environmental damage by trivializing the details. They don't tell you the details. They avoid them completely. They move the responsibility to a market and relieve the offender of any responsibility. Very seldom do economists talk about responsibility for cleaning up a mess. And if you go back to this deal back here, this mine that had this disaster, the company that was running the mine went bankrupt. All of its obligations to clean the river were assumed by the entire European Union. The funds for cleaning up the river did not come to the corporation that was running the mine. They quit making profits on the day they destroyed this river, but nobody had to give anything up. Nobody that profited for the previous 20 years running this mine lost anything. It's just a bad situation. So let's talk about some deceptive choices used by economists. One is this thing called a negative externality. This word externality, makes it seem that pollution is something that happens outside the control of a corporation. Pollution is typically the result of convenience or a result of choices to increase profits. You got to remember, every dollar spent on prevention is a dollar less in profits. And you also got to remember, Milton Friedman, biggest economist out there in his day, said that a primary purpose of a firm is to increase profits. If they're supposed to increase profits, do they do it by spending less on environmental protection? And the answer is, in some cases, yes. Market failure. This is another word that economists use to describe pollution. This downplays the role of the profit maximized behavior of firms and moving the responsibility to the market. It's not a market failure. If I look out there and I've got plastics in the ocean, that's not a market failure. That's a failure of society to deal with a problem. Society is making convenient choices to not manage the garbage, and it washes out in the ocean. Pollution is invariably the effect of convenience. This last term that they come up with is economically efficient level of pollution. Back to that optimum and that operation point. This is just nonsense. Pollution is a complex problem with varying effects on the environment. Economists use the word efficient in order to imbue some sense of quality to our decisions to pollute. That's just not the way it works, okay? Pollution is really best described as a moral hazard, okay? Profits for one person and pollution for the other, okay? Often the firms that create the pollution don't live anywhere near the pollution that's happening. And, what you need to come back to is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If you could follow that mantra, you could probably solve a lot of the pollution problems that are out there today. So let's go back to this crazy solution. So economists say add a tax. Add a tax. There we go. We're going to put this tax here that's equal to external cost. Okay. Remember, we described how we couldn't figure out how large this arrow should be because we didn't know how much the cost should be spread over quantity. So there's no mechanical way to make this actually happen. Economists never talk about that. It's really a goofball solution. We're going to tax somebody equal to the cost of pollution. You can't do it. It's not possible. Okay. So how does a tax stop pollution? If I were polluting here, I'm still going to be polluting here. I might be polluting at maybe 15% less, but I'm still polluting. So it really depends on the nature of the pollution. If the river is dying, I shouldn't pollute at all. I need to do something to restore life in that river. How large should the tax be? We talked about that already. We don't know how many quantity of units to overlay this cost over to figure out how large the tax should be. And how does this approach apply to the Exxon Valdez, the Deep Horizon disaster? Any of these real life situations. And the economists never explain that because it's not possible. Their solution is wacky. Even if you could get the tax correct, who is now responsible for the cleanup? Is it the firm, or has that now been transferred to the government that collected the tax? Okay, and then how do you remove the acid once it's in the rain? The answer is you don't. It's just not possible. So this crazy approach of just, let's add a tax, relieves the polluter from any responsibility for their actions. They could still pollute as much or more. Okay, this approach is far too simplistic to represent what happens in the real world. Some types of pollution are extremely serious. Others may not be so. And without talking about the actual pollution that's being incurred and methods to reduce it, it's a stupid discussion. And what drives me nuts is students are forced to believe this nonsense, because these poor students, they're probably taking an AP Econ class and they're going to go take that test, and if they can understand this silly solution and play it back on a test and get a good grade, they'll be able to save a few bucks on their college education. So students are forced to believe this nonsense in order to get into college of perhaps their choice. It's just not right. So here's a very interesting cartoon. And this cartoon is in a Texas high school standard textbook. It sits off in the margin with nothing around it, no explanation, whatever. But here we got a couple of executives sitting in their country club smoking maybe a cigar, don't know. And one guy says to the other, all I can say is that if being a leading manufacturer means being a polluter, then so be it. And this is in the margin without any guidance whatsoever. And what's a student supposed to think? They're supposed to think, there is a social optimum. And if I pollute, then so be it. Is this really what we want to be teaching our kids? I can understand an adult reading this in a New Yorker magazine and seeing the irony of it. But a 17-year-old, that's not the message they're going to get. So why teach this nonsense? That's a real good question. Why do we teach this nonsense? Okay, number one, these theories only persist to allow corporations to have their way with environmental regulation. Their way is reduce the cost of environmental management and increase their profits. Okay, that's the only reason this silly theory exists. Okay, university professors are paid extremely well to promote these theories, and users' revenues exceed $1 billion annually teaching this wonderful Econ 101 nonsense. There is far too much money out there, and this money has corrupted our educational system. Sad to say, but it's true. There is no value to the common citizen for these theories that purposely distort reality to the detriment of the environment. There's no value. So drop Econ 101. It is not a science. Take a personal finance class instead. Good luck, and go out there and learn the things you need to know to run your life, and be aware of Econ 101. Thanks. Bye.